Do you have effective routines that support your students' language proficiency and communication skills? We often think of the communication modes, proficiency levels, and 90% target language as the routines that we foster in our classrooms. Well, in this episode, you'll hear about another type of routine. These are student-generated graphic organizers. These are visual tools that offer a unique pathway for students to comprehend and engage with the target language. So, let's jump in. Are you a language teacher looking for some reassurance that what you're doing in the classroom is on the right track? Or maybe you're looking for some ways to teach even more effectively. If you're one or the other or somewhere in between, you've landed in the right place. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast with your host, me, Joshua Cabral. You're about to get tips, tools, and resources so that your students continue to rise in proficiency and communicate with confidence. Let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral, and thank you, as always, for taking the time out of your week to hang out with me and talk about language teaching and language learning and language acquisition, all the fun things that we as language teachers love to talk about. So thank you so much for taking the time to devote to your teaching, to think about your teaching, and to listen to some new ideas and to rethink what you're doing in your classroom. Just one of the many things that I know that you do that makes you an incredible language teacher, and I really appreciate all the effort that you put into it, and thank you very much for being here with me today. So in this episode, we are diving into the idea of using student-generated graphic organizers. Now, you may have heard of them referred to as brain frames, sometimes thinking maps. They have different words used to describe what they are, but what it comes down to is that these are graphic organizers that students are creating. They're not supplied to them in terms of what it should look like, but students are learning to generate them on their own and then to use them as they're engaging with the language. So you may hear me refer to them as graphic organizers or brain frames or thinking maps because they have all these different ways of talking about them. But just so you know, regardless of how I might refer to it, they're all essentially the same thing. We just use different terminology sometimes. But we're going to explore how these student-generated graphic organizers or brain frames or thinking maps can support our students' language proficiency and their communication skills. And then we're going to then look at 5 specific types of brain frames or thinking maps that have been proven effective in the world language classroom. And when I say that they've been proven effective, I'm going to be speaking from my own personal experience with using them. There are other models of what students can do with these brain frames and thinking maps, but I have used 5 of them in particular that I have found really effective with students. So I wanted to share them with you today so you can think about using them in your own classroom and maybe even look into the other versions because they might be effective in your classroom. But I'm just going to be talking about my personal experience, what's worked well with my students. So I began in the introduction by asking about routines in the classroom and having really effective learning routines. And take a second and think about your routines in your classroom and what do you do that's effective. Learning routines are so important. They are crucial in nurturing students' language proficiency and their communication skills. As we often focus on routines about do-nows and exit tickets and all those things, and including the communication modes, proficiency levels, target language use, today I want to shift that focus a little bit and look at using these graphic organizers as another way of looking at routines in your classroom. And I refer to them as a routine. Once they know how to use them, then it does become a routine for them. For example, you might mention a particular type of graphic organizer that they will create, and that becomes a routine for them. They know exactly what to do because they've practiced it. So these graphic organizers are simple. They're simple, they're versatile, and they foster higher level cognitive processes. And I say that they are simple because you as a teacher don't have to create anything. The fact that students are creating the graphic organizer on their own and then putting the content and information into it means that it's completely student generated and you don't have to create anything. And they could be used across so many different age groups and content areas, and they're really sort of indispensable in language teaching, I think, because you can use them for so many different things. Now, these were not developed, like a Venn diagram. A lot of people know what that is. They were not developed by language teachers for use in language acquisition. All of these graphic organizers can be used in any classroom. And I often see that when I teach students how to use these, that I will hear from their other teachers in their other content areas that they see students using them. And then they'll start to ask about it, and they'll come in and they'll say, how I see students are taking notes this way. Can you tell me a little more about that? So you will see that once students see that they're useful, that they use them beyond your language classroom. But for our purposes, I will say that they are most useful if you are doing a pre-speaking or pre-writing activity with students, because this gives them an opportunity to gather and organize their thoughts, their ideas, and different concepts that might come up, either as they are engaging in a discussion or if they are doing some sort of writing. It really provides a model for them to follow, almost like a brainstorming model, but it's a lot more cohesive and structured than just brainstorming. And this could be something that you have students do in the classroom, or it can be done as a homework assignment as well, so they can just come in the next day and be ready to go with whatever the writing is or the discussion, or just really bringing together thoughts and ideas on a video or a discussion you had in a class the day before. So these ideas of thinking maps and brain frames are companies out there that are teaching teachers how to do this. So you can Google them, thinking maps or brain frames, and you can find a lot of images and graphics about how to use them. You can read blog posts about them. A lot of teachers are using them. You can find training on them in different places. So hopefully what I'm telling you about today is going to spark your interest, and you can look a little further. But if you would like to see specific examples, because this can be very visual, I'm going to attempt to explain what they look like as students are creating them, but the visual can always help. So you can take a look at my blog post, which is at wlclassroom.com/mindmap, or the link is in the show notes. So I just thought I'd throw mind map in there because, we have thinking maps and brain frames. So I just came up with my own way of doing it, and I call it mind maps. So you can check out some images of what these look like at wlclassroom.com/mindmap, or the link is right in the show notes. So as I mentioned, the key to these graphic organizers is that they are student created. They create them on their own. They are drawing them on a blank piece of paper, a lined sheet of paper. They learn how to make them. They learned what they're used for, and then how to add language and details. And this is really helping to support their critical thinking skills. So you get to the point when students know what to do, they can just completely draw out what it looks like and then fill in the information. So you don't have to create anything in advance on your own. And since students create them, they are really engaged in the concept and the critical thinking from the very beginning, rather than having a graphic organizer provided to them, such as a Venn diagram. Now, students could easily create a Venn diagram, but what I'm going to talk about is some ways of going beyond that, and that it's not just using those two circles. And there are several types, and it can be left to the student to determine which is the best one for them to prepare for whatever the assignment is, whether it's writing or speaking. You as the teacher can suggest you might want to use this brain frame and reference what it's called. And when students know what they're called, they'll know exactly how to do it. And so it requires going through the various types in advance with students and really onboarding them to understanding what they are, and perhaps even having a visual in the classroom. And there are possibilities for those visuals in the blog post that I referenced. You can just print out the pictures, because those are the ones that I use in my classroom when I reference them to students. So now that we have the background on these thinking maps or these brain frames or these mind maps or whatever you want to call them, we have the background on the idea of a student-generated graphic organizer. So now I'm going to talk through 5 types that are useful for us in the language classroom that I've found with my own students. So the first one is for linear details, or putting things in a sequential order of events. Now, students use this organizer to illustrate the sequential order of events in, say, a narrative or a story that they're reading. Whatever it is, whenever they have to put in order a sequence of events. I've also done this with students when they're just talking about their day, where they can use this graphic organizer to say what they have done throughout the day with details that they can then use to talk, they can use use to have a discussion, to answer questions, or to even write about it. So it's anything that will be done in a linear way. So it can be a story or just a narrative about what you're doing during the day or what you're doing during a class. So what this looks like is you have squares and you have circles. And it's really important to keep in mind that squares are always the concrete ideas that you're talking about. And then the circles are always details that go along with the squares, the ideas that are in the squares. So when you're doing the linear details, students know that they put the details in order in like a linear line, and they put squares around them and an arrow between them, showing that it's moving forward. So for example, I get up in the morning, I eat breakfast, I take a shower, I get my things ready for school, and I take the school bus and I arrive at school. And so each one of those events would be in a box, in a square, and there would be an arrow between them showing that this is the sequence of events. So that's step one. So that's the sequential order. And now what we do is for each one of them, we can draw a circle above or below and connect it with a line and add a detail to that. So for I wake up in the morning, they could then put the time as a detail. So it's 6:30 a.m., they put it in a circle and they draw a line to that box. And then they could do a detail about what they had for breakfast. They can do a detail about how they got to school. They can do a detail about what time they arrived at school or who they went to school with that day. So you start with the boxes that are the concrete events that happened, and then you add all of these details. And the details are always in circles and then connected with a line to the box. And again, you can see the visual in the blog post of what it looks like, but I think it's probably pretty obvious if you're thinking about it in a linear fashion. Now, once students have this and you ask them questions about their day, they have so many of those details and they can really see what it is. They can write about it, but they have this graphic organizer that's going to help them in either having a discussion, answer questions, or writing. And if you tell students, okay, I want you to prepare for this writing or prepare for this discussion, and I want you to do a linear events brain frame. And they'll know now, okay, because you've taught them that you do the major events go in the box, and then you do an arrow to show the next event as many as you want to go, and that details go in the circles and they're connected with a line. And once students have this, they can just take a blank sheet of paper and they can create that without you having to do it for them. Now, this is the idea of it being student created, is that if you give them that, they can just fill in the details. But there is research into both of these methods, whether you're thinking of them as thinking maps or brain frames, that the critical thinking that goes into creating it is what helps them to actually think of it in a linear way and then to create the details. So once students know how to do that and you say do a linear brain frame about the story or what happened in the chapter, they'll get in the habit of doing that, which is really preparing them to have that discussion and then write about it. The next one is the cause and effect brain frame. So with this one, students use this graphic organizer to look at and analyze the reasons and consequences, such as those that lead to historical events. So you want to encourage students to detail the causes in one section and then the effects in another. So with the event in the square in the center. So you have the major event that happened, like let's use the French Revolution as a square in the middle of the page. And then the causes are in circles on the left, and they have an arrow going into the French Revolution. So you have all these circles with all the reasons with the arrows going into the square in the middle, the French Revolution. And then to the right, arrows going out are all the consequences of it. So again, if you tell students, I want you to do a cause and effect brain frame about, give them a historical event, give them something that happens in a story. So they start with that square in the middle, and then on the left, they do all the circles of the things that caused it, and then they do an arrow going into that square in the middle, and then what happened because of that, like what was the effect of that happening, and those go in circles on the right with an arrow going out. And because students are creating this is what solidifies that there is a core event and you're looking at what caused it and then what were the effects of it happening. The next brain frame or thinking map is the brainstorming brain frame. And this is really for quick details. So this organizer helps students to quickly come up with details on various topics. So with this, you start with the core topic in a square in the middle of the page, and then around it in circles are all those details that are going into that main idea. So, for example, students can brainstorm vocabulary and phrases related to travel. So, you put travel in the middle in the square. That's always the main point, the main topic. And then you can write all the different phrases that you might use when you're talking about travel in circles around it on the page. And they'll do this before writing maybe a travel diary or an entry into a journal or participating in a speaking activity. Or you could also use it for ideas about a character in a story or details on a concept that was presented in an article or a video. And in this case, you're really just giving that main topic in the middle, and then with this brainstorming in circles around it so that they can then, as they're going into their writing or they're going into a discussion, I find that this works really well when you're doing discussions in the classroom, because students can just look at the different ideas that they put on there. Like maybe it's something about food or something that happened in the story, or you put a character in the story in the middle and just say, what are 5 or 6 or 10 things that you can think of that are connected to this character? And that's what they put the circles all around, all those details. And as you're talking and you're having the discussion, they can pull those details in. And the fourth one is compare and contrast. So this is a compare and contrast brain frame. So if you tell students, I want you to do a compare and contrast with this, this is on the idea of a Venn diagram. But I have found that a Venn diagram can be very limiting because it doesn't always allow for the amount of space that students need, and there's putting all kinds of words in and trying to fit it in. There's not enough space, or there's too much space. Anyway, but a predetermined graphic organizer is not helping them to have the same critical thinking skills. So you take the two ideas that you're comparing and contrasting, and you put them on two sides of the page that they are working on in a box. Remember, always those main points are always in the box. So you just have these two, maybe two characters in a story that you want them to do a comparison of. And so anything that those characters have in common, you will put in circles between the boxes and then connect both circles to the boxes. And then anything that is different that they don't have in common, you will put on the outside of the boxes. So the box on the right, it'll be on the right-hand side. The box on the left, it'll be on the left-hand side. And then you just have the details about them in circles. Remember, the details always go in circles. And then you connect those circles to the box. And so the circles between the boxes with lines connected to both are where students are going to put the things that they have in common. I find this works really well with characters in a story, but you could do it with anything that you would typically use a Venn diagram for. You can have it done this way. But because students are creating it on their own, they are thinking a little more critically about it and forming it on their own, and it's solidifying in their mind by drawing those lines that these things they have in common, and then things on the outside they don't have in common. So those are the parts of this process where it's student generated that really helps to enhance their critical thinking skills. And then the last one I'll mention is the categorizing brain frame. So I'll just say do a category brain frame. And this is where students put in a box a main idea, like we said. So you might have 2 or 3 boxes that have main ideas in them. Then you put an arrow underneath them, and then you put examples of things that go within that category in circles underneath. Because remember, details are always the circles. And I have used this actually as a way of teaching verb forms in a way that doesn't just look at a grid and verb conjugations. So I've done this actually as part of a PACE model where students are finding what subject pronouns are connected to what verb forms. So I will have them put in the categories in the boxes on the top, I will have them put all of the verb endings or the verb forms. Like I might say, if it's Spanish, it'll be like canto and cantas and canta. And as they're looking within a paragraph, something they're reading, then they will put underneath, oh, when I see it's canto, I always know that it's yo, and that's what they would put underneath it. Or the cantaste, they'll say, oh, that's always tú. And they might see canta, and they'll say, oh, that's ella, or sometimes it's usted. So they're actually using the categorizing and looking at the verb forms and giving examples of the subjects that use that verb form. But that's a way of looking at it that I've used with the PACE model that's worked really well. But you could do it with anything. You could have fruits, vegetables, clothing, places, where students are just having a way to organize their thoughts and put things into categories. But this one starts with the categories on the top, and those are always in the squares because those are the main ideas. And then underneath in the circles, you have the details. So main ideas always in a square, and then you have the circles. So there you have the idea of these student-generated graphic organizers that we refer to as brain frames, thinking maps, mind maps. And the fact that students are creating them on their own is what really helps to solidify and show their concrete understanding of the information, which is really helpful before they're writing, before they're doing a speaking activity. And it's really helpful to present these to students in a way where they understand what they are. So you can practice with them, do a couple of homework assignments where they're using them in different ways, and then having some visuals and you refer to them that way. If you haven't used them before, I would suggest choosing maybe 2 and have those be your go-tos, and then add on other versions. Like start with the brainstorming brain frame. That's a fairly simple one where it's just the square in the middle and then the examples are in circles around it. And then you could do the linear details where they're putting the details in the boxes and showing arrows to show that it's linear, and then adding the details in the circles and then connecting with the line. If you try to do all of them at once, it can get overwhelming to students. So figure out which ones are going to work best for you and try it out with students. And it's also really helpful to have the visual up in the classroom so that when you refer to them, students know which one you're talking about by name and visually what it is. And you can get all of those in the blog post that I referenced earlier. So it's at wlclassroom.com/mindmap, and you will see different versions of all of the types of brain frames or thinking maps that you can do with students. And you can just print out the ones that I have right there, and you can use those as the visual in your classroom. So be sure to check that out. It's right there in the show notes. And also in the show notes, you will see the link to sign up for Talking Points, my weekly email newsletter with tips and resources for language teaching. And there are also links to get in touch with me if you would like to work together. And we can do that either in person in your school or remotely. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to the World Language Classroom podcast. Be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so that you never miss an episode. Let's keep the conversation going on social media. Connect with me on X, aka Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WL Classroom. And for even more valuable resources, visit my website, wlclassroom.com, where you'll find over 300 blog posts about language teaching. So stay inspired, keep growing, and continue making a difference in your language classroom.